In this video, we're going to discuss the carbon cycle. You're going to be able to explain how carbon travels throughout this cycle and why this cycle is important to our living things. First thing, carbon. We spent an entire chapter on carbon. Hopefully you remember a couple things. Carbon is the most common element in all living things. The carbon cycle is the movement of carbon between reservoirs on the earth. Remember that a reservoir is a place that something is stored. Like a normal cycle, we can start anywhere, but where we're going to start is in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is layers of gas that surrounds the Earth, and the atmosphere collects CO2. So looking here, our atmosphere is this space right up here, this kind of foggy layer. This is actually looking at the atmosphere. You hear words like ozone discussing the atmosphere and discussing global warming. That's all part of the carbon cycle. From the atmosphere, we have photosynthesis. Plants breathe in CO2. They pull carbon out of the air and they use it to create sugars. In this step, carbon becomes part of the biosphere. From there, animals, the opposite is animals breathe in O2 and release CO2. They put CO2 back into the atmosphere. Primary consumers, these are things that eat plants, take in carbon and energy. Secondary consumers, they eat animals, and they still take in carbon and energy. So from plants, it goes to animals. Us as humans, we add CO2 in other ways. We burn fossil fuels, releasing CO2, carbon dioxide, and CO, carbon monoxide, into the atmosphere. Some examples are factories, cars, trucks, power plants. We've done an entire project on fossil fuel emissions. There are some natural ways CO2 is released. Certain natural disasters, such as volcanoes and forest fires, release CO2 back into the atmosphere. Once plants and animals die, their bodies are broken down by microbes and the carbon in their bodies becomes part of the soil. And after a long period of time, millions of years with very hot temperatures and tons of pressure, the remains of the plants and animals become fossil fuels. Our three types of fossil fuels are oil, natural gas, and coal. The last major player in the carbon cycle, just like in the water cycle, is the ocean. The ocean takes in CO2, marine animals through photosynthesis, and the water actually takes in CO2. But the ocean also releases CO2. Marine animals, such as dolphins and all of those, they breathe out CO2, increasing the CO2 levels in the air. So in this process, we have places that take in CO2. Okay? Places that carbon dioxide collects. The atmosphere, photosynthesis, the ocean. Okay? Decomposition actually takes in CO2, and fossil fuels are solid carbon. And then we have things that release carbon. Okay? Animals, not human functions, natural CO2 places. These all release carbon back. When one outweighs the other, when you have more releasing than you have gaining, we have the issue that we're having now. We're having increased carbon levels. Our goal is to try to balance this out so we're not releasing more carbon than we're taking in. That's why we have things such as Arbor Day, where everyone says to plant a tree because trees are really good. What they're really good at is collecting in CO2. Hopefully at this point you're going to be able to explain how carbon travels throughout the carbon cycle. You have on the back of your notes a sheet that looks like this. Let's just clear out that font. Okay. You have a sheet that looks like this. Has the steps of the carbon cycle, and they're labeled with letters. And you have a key along the bottom here, which in this current view might be hard to see, but if I zoom in a little bit, we're going to be able to see it a little bit better. So what I would like you to do is to grab a different color for each of these things, and you're going to color in the key like this. And then you're going to come up and color in that area. So like A is the atmosphere. So I'm going to take that same color I colored in the key, and I'm going to color in the sky here. This does not have to be an amazing work of art. Okay? But you should have a nice color-coded carbon cycle when you're done. If you'd like an example of what this is supposed to look like when it's done, please feel free to talk to me, and I have an example all done out. Okay? Once you have this all colored, your carbon cycle notes is complete.